Okay, so welcome everyone to the City Studio London roundtable discussion taking place at our fourth Hubbub Project Showcase event. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Jacob, and I first got involved with City Studio London in the fall of 2019 during my time as a Fanshawe student. I had the opportunity to participate in two City Studio projects, first in the fall of 2019 and then in the spring of 2020, during my final year of the GIS and Urban Planning program. For the past 2 semesters, I'm grateful to have been working as a research intern alongside great colleagues at City Studio London and the Innovation Works team. It is my pleasure to sit down with all of you today. So without further delay, I'll give Helen, Valentina, and Zayana a chance to introduce themselves and speak to how they became involved with City Studio.
All right, so I think I'm starting us off. Hello, my name is Helen. I am a 5th year student of psychology and business at Western University. And I got involved with City Studio through the Scholars Electives program, which in our last year, we do a community engaged learning course. And so we had the opportunity to meet a lot of community partners and everyone was matched with a team. And I was really eager to work with City Studio because of the work that they do to bridge education and then community impact. And so I was on a team with a group of 3 other students. And we got to look through all of the projects that City Studio was doing and create graphics and content, just copy for social media. So essentially a lot of storytelling over the semester, which was really neat because it was more behind the scenes work, but we got to hear about all of the other projects that were happening at City Studio and then kind of tell the world about it. So that was my semester.
Awesome.
That's great. Thank you, Helen. My name is Valentina. I'm a social work student at King's Western. And I was involved with City Studio through my policy and social work class. Our professor, Dr. Sethi, she got us involved with the studio and City of London to propose some innovative solutions or alternatives to the problem of barriers to employment that newcomers experience. So we were involved throughout our term with the City Studio. And then at the end, we were able to showcase our project as well, giving some recommendations to the city about what research told us that would be useful in the long term.
Awesome. And my name is Ziana Kotadia. I am a 3rd year global gender studies student at Huron University College. And I was first exposed to City Studio in the spring of 2020 when I was in a global studies class that took on a City Studio project. But the circumstances, of course, were a little bit unique at that time, given that the pandemic had just hit. So unfortunately didn't have an opportunity to complete the project. But since then, I was elected as the president of Huron Student Council, and I've been working with City Studio on the governance side of things, which has been a really interesting opportunity to learn more about how City Studio functions and what the behind the scenes looks like. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you all. So to start, I'm aware from my own personal experience, as well as feedback from other students, that at first it can be a bit tricky to understand the role or the model of City Studio upon first being introduced to City Studio projects. So I'm interested to hear about your initial introduction to City Studio and like your experience beginning to participate in CSL projects and what your first impressions were or understandings of City Studio's role was in the process.
I can start us off. So I think our team was in a very unique position because we didn't just see City Studio's role in one particular project. We got to read about all of the projects and work with Jacob as well to advertise those, which meant that we had to understand what was happening in the project, what the outcomes and the objectives were. And so we got to see how City Studio functioned in a variety of different settings. And I always have been told that a picture has 1,000 words. So maybe I can show you guys kind of what this looked like. This was our spreadsheet. So this was my first impression of City Studio, very organized, all of the projects scheduled out, which one is going to be advertised when, and then we had instructions on the context and the needs of each project. And then we got to turn those into some really cool graphics that would then be posted on social media. And so my first impression of City Studio was, wow, they are doing a lot. And I had no idea. I've been living in London for 5 years now, since I started school at Western. So it was really neat to see all of the work that is happening, often in partnership with the City of London. and doing some really tangible work, not just research, but also proposing impact based solutions and changes. And then that partnership that happens with the post-secondary institutions. So I think just by nature of our project and being able to see all of the things that have been happening over the semester, we had a very broad understanding of what CityStudio looks like, but maybe not quite as specific as Valentina or Ziana. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys learned too.
Yeah, so yeah, at the beginning, it was also a little bit like, social innovation hub. And that's kind of like the first impression. And I know there's some of those in big cities like Toronto and Vancouver, but, in London, maybe we don't have as much of that, or I guess like tangible resources that you can go to work together, with different stakeholders to accomplish things. But as we go working on the project, like the first couple of meetings, when the city staff and CityStudio came to our class to introduce themselves and work on the project, it really felt like it was like a really good institution that will facilitate our work together, and that without them we wouldn't have the bridge, at least for students, to come directly to the city with solutions or community-based alternatives to the problems we're dealing with. So at first it felt like we need them. It's like, this is a good bridge for us to bring our work forward, and that it can be applied to the problems in the city.
Awesome.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I would build off of that by saying that I think your initial remark, Jacob, that students tend to engage in a process of discovering what CityStudio is about, was definitely accurate for me, at least. I hadn't heard of CityStudio before that first class, wasn't really sure what the mandate was, what the goals were, just how CityStudio functioned at all. But it was a really interesting journey from learning more about how it functioned in a classroom setting. The project that class was going to take on was reading through the UN initiative on safe cities and safe public spaces, and coming up with a set of tools to help the City of London interpret the initiative. And I suppose my initial impression based on that was what a really cool opportunity to translate what students are learning in classrooms into something tangible and actionable, and to understand how to apply our learnings to work that we could be doing. So yeah, that was definitely the first sort of set of things I was thinking about when I was exposed to CityStudio.
So with each of you having shared different experiences with CityStudio London, how did your initial perceptions of CityStudio London change throughout your time participating?
I think mine just grew in a sense of awe of how much is going on. We had a spreadsheet of over 50 rows and columns of all of the different initiatives, and seeing how diverse they were as well. It's not like CityStudio is just working in one particular niche. There's projects that are happening in city planning and accessibility, in database development, and seeing also that a lot of these projects aren't just ideation, they're tangible implementation. Databases are being created. A lot of the projects had next steps. So seeing how students were going to build on that, or how the project itself was going to be taken and implemented, was something that I grew in my understanding of over the semester. And I think is really exciting too, because for a lot of students, education feels very intangible. There's a lot of proposals, there's a lot of assignments, there's very little practical change or impact. And so to see students engage in a way that actually has a difference in the way that systems function in our community was really exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you in that sense, because so at the beginning it felt like, okay, this is a bridge and this is an opportunity to connect different dots, and then how can we put this work to to tangible solutions. And then as we kept working on our project, and ours is a social work-based project, so thinking about the needs of immigrants in London, and London has a lot of immigrants now, so how can we service that community? So to bring that social enterprise aspect to the learning that you're doing, connecting those two things, and actually having a deliverable to bring to the city, and to to hopefully be heard and applied, to me, like, that was invaluable to have that opportunity. And I didn't have that in many classes before. And I think that without CityStudio's commitment to making those projects happen and connecting those people that have those interests, and that ultimately will generate some social change, that understanding of like, we need this kind of institutions. To me, that made a huge difference in how I embrace my class and my assignment, to go from just something that me and my professor are going to see and maybe my classmates, but that could potentially be received as feedback to deliver more solutions to the social issue we're working with.
I would add that my initial impression definitely changed in that I just learned more about the depth and the scope of the different kinds of work that City Studio does. Helen mentioned that it's not just one thing and that there's a really broad variety of different kinds of projects. So that was something that I don't think I perceived the first time I engaged with City Studio, but the more exposure I've had, the more I've understood that what this breadth looks like. And another thing that has sort of shifted for me over the course of my involvement with City Studio is I've learned more about the networking capacities that being involved in a project can offer you and gives you an opportunity to develop. And that's definitely one of the things I think that students get out of working on City Studio projects is there's this really great opportunity to get to know more different kinds of people in ways that could be really beneficial for what plans look like after graduation, for example.
Definitely. From my own experience, I began participating during City Studio's pilot year here in London. And that was with GIS and urban planning related work and projects. And I felt like kind of in that urban planning bubble. Our projects were focused on, the first one was focused on creating a process for better community development or community improvement plan along the Hamilton road corridor specifically. And upon like presenting that project at the Hubbub showcase at the end of the semester, you realize that all of these different departments are also involved in City Studio projects, and you get the chance to network with all kinds of different departments and students who worked with different city staff. And even though the projects are conceptual and there's no budget set aside to pursue this work, it's still work that is very valuable to the city. It's valuable to the educational institutions. Gives students a chance to showcase what they're capable of. Yeah, so that first semester, first introduction to City Studio, was a little bit like in the bubble, but the Hubbub project showcase really brought it all together, and you realize that there's a much bigger picture involved for sure. Yeah, so did the experience change your perceptions about education or engaging in civil discourse throughout your experience?
I think yes, absolutely. This was kind of related to the next question of, well, as what draws students to participating in something with City Studio. The perception and the image of community partnering with an educational institution is something that I think we need to see so much more of, not just at a post-secondary level, but also at a primary level, because there's, as a student, I've noticed this great divide between school and industry, and it's almost as if our system sets you up to kind of stay there forever. We see more and more students pursuing graduate school and certificates and never quite feeling like they're ready to step into a working position, whether it's in the industry or even in an educational setting or another one. And so I think being able to work with City Studio in a way that has civil community discourse integrated into education is something that was an incredible opportunity and a privilege also for me. And it's really exciting at Western to see that community engaged learning courses, CEL courses they're called, are being integrated in more and more programs. This was a requirement for the Scholars Electives program, but then also they're becoming more available as electives for other students as well. And I think that it was something that I knew we needed, and it was something that I really was seeking. And so to be able to participate in that has really just affirmed all the more the importance that this kind of an experience can have in the development, not just of a student, but also the relationships between institutions. There's networking on an individual level, and then there's networking as how does Western, how does Huron, how does King's, how does Fanshawe integrate in a community? Even, for example, a lot of students leave London. There's a big divide between the demographics and the population of the post-secondary institutions and then London overall as a city. And so building these kinds of bridges and getting students connected with what's happening in the city and being able to think of how can I have impact here? How can I invest here? I hope would encourage students to also stay and to fall in love a little bit with the city. I'm staying here. I got a position in London and I care deeply about the city. everyone else, there seems to be a mass exodus to Toronto, but I'm hoping that through more opportunities like this, people will really start to care about London itself, and make that connection between university and or college, and even some high school students I know have worked in these capacities as well, and then the city that I would hope people call home.
Thank you for sharing that. I hope too that a lot of people stay in London. And then for me, with the project, because it was a policy class, our professor is very much invested in working from a community participatory, research-based, and everything we do in this class, in this program, in social work, is about the community. So she wanted to give us this opportunity to really connect that abstract learning or like that theoretical learning to, okay, if you were to work in partnership with these stakeholders, what would you do? And let's do it together. Let's work throughout the semester to guide you to that, mentor you through that process, and deliver something. So for us, it was very much part of our program. Social work is very political in nature as well, and because we work, in partnership with so many stakeholders, it was also a great exercise to learn about what that's like in real life. And when you get 5 minutes to show your work, that you something that you worked on for 6 months, you really learn certain skills there as well. And working together with all my peers was very valuable to connect again our ideas of social workers to becoming agents of political and civic action and civic engagement. So to me, it translated directly into my professional and academic aspirations too.
I really liked what both of you shared, in that I think a lot of my understanding of the value of engaged learning has come from CityStudio and learning what kinds of things translate well into practice. And I have a background in arts and in theater. And one of the things that I learned when I was playwriting was that there's just so much that doesn't translate from page to stage unless you're also looking at the stage and engaging with the realities of how different actors move through space and what that looks like and feels like in practice. And I felt like a lot of the learnings that came from being a playwright and then also being a director were also reflected in this process of being a researcher and being someone who does theory, and then seeing students translate that work into practice, or understanding how I can do that and what it actually looks like when you're faced with it. So I would echo what Valentina said, in that I think that's a really important takeaway. And I would add that there's just so much value and power in these horizontal networks among different institutions and with the City of London, as well as with the London community as well. I know Helen mentioned that there's a bit of a university bubble, and I would definitely agree. As someone who's in student government, I definitely see how that bubble functions and how students can sometimes get so absorbed in the university community that we forget there's a broader community that we're part of as well. So I think community engaged learning is really important for that reason as well.
Amazing. Thank you each for those enlightening perspectives. So this semester, as Helen mentioned, I had the opportunity to correspond with Helen and her team during their storytelling of CityStudio London projects. I'm curious to know more about your experiences as a storyteller, and particularly what you have learned about London from having become familiar and engaged with so many CityStudio projects.
Yeah, this was really neat. I personally love storytelling and writing, so I had so much fun over the course of this semester. And I think to be able to tell a story, you have to learn the story so that you can tell it. So it was really neat to get an understanding of all of the projects that are happening. And I remember just being amazed at some of the things that I was learning that I didn't know of. For example, there was one project that was working on a community improvement plan for the post-COVID downtown scene. And some of the statistics cited in there were that nearly half of the buildings on Richmond Row aren't wheelchair accessible, so that there's a huge opportunity for development. Or that buildings and roads and parking lots take up 62% of downtown space, but they're only used about 50% of the time. So thinking of how, I'm not very familiar with city planning, but getting an understanding of what that world looks like and the impact that it has for, I want to say user experience, but it's really more just life and the day-to-day comings and goings of a city was really neat. There was another project that I remember on the local housing sector challenges experienced in London, and it the team had walked through the timeline and the process of what it looks like for people who are applying for accessible housing, and for support, and that it can take years and years and years, and that the lines are so long. We don't have enough capacity to provide for everyone who's in need. So learning about some of those needs and some of those different people groups and challenges that being in a student bubble, having lived in residence and then relatively close to campus, and not having a car, so I'm very confined to everything that is within a bikeable radius of my house. I haven't seen some of the more suburbs. London is a very sprawled out city. And so learning about what that's like, we've got, I think, almost 500,000 people living in here. So learning about the experiences that different people have, and how a city is built, and how even something as simple as infrastructure can really change the quality of life that not only people but a community experiences was really neat. And so CityStudio being a part of a lot of the ideation process for that, and the proposals and the research was a great opportunity for us to summarize and condense those stories and tell them, but then really learn a lot along the way as well.
Along the way, this is kind of a question for each of you, but Helen, you can go first if you have something. Did you discover any fascinating capabilities of the London student body that you weren't privy to beforehand?
I'm continually blown away by the value of research. I think it's something that I never really thought I would experience or undertake outside of an academic setting, but having worked multiple internships in the summer now and starting a full-time position, seeing that the value of gathering data and how that can be used to make informed decisions and to ideate on improvement and change is something that as students we have a lot of experience in, and recognizing that that's a valuable skill and that can be used to kickstart some real change, and to make sure that change is not just something that sounds good, but that is actually helpful and useful because it's based on an evidence-based theory, and talking to people, asking what people need, looking at the situation that you're handed, rather than just doing something that looks good or sounds good. I think that value of that research and seeing how capable students are to do that, how transferable a lot of those skills are that we sometimes think, oh, we'll never use this again, was really encouraging as a student myself.
Valentino or Ziana, do you have anything to add to any fascinating capabilities that you discovered from the London student body?
Yeah, to me, it was really good kind of like process of seeing some of my peers evolve into more of the political selves, came a little bit more, and their civic engagement selves, because I feel that at least in social work, some people see social work as a direct practice that involves one-on-one counseling or one-on-one involvement with, maybe a group of people, but not so much as in like policy making or research or, working with the city, working with municipalities and provincial government. So I feel that in this process, through the learning in our class, and like I said, my professor is very committed to help understand that, yes, you do work one-on-one with people, but you need to understand how the societal forces work to affect them, and how everything political, economical, everything comes together and shapes you. And if you don't understand that, it probably won't be, too helpful for them. So to see, my peers and myself as well grow within that identity of political and social actors that can, and will have a voice that will come, it will be connected through places like CityStudio, that a bridge to bring it together with stakeholders. I think that was really valuable for all of us. And I think it wouldn't have been as real, as tangible, if we didn't engage in processes like this, when you know that at the end of your term, you have work that's going to be presented to stakeholders that have power to, to bring about change.
I would build off of that to add that I think one of the really cool things about CityStudio is it also gives voice to a variety of different perspectives. Different kinds of students have an opportunity to present why, this particular idea is relevant to them. And also, it's an opportunity to understand how different kinds of lived experiences will influence projects in different ways. So that's something that's been really cool to see. And it's been incredible to see the different kinds of capacities of students based on how they identify or what sort of experiences they've lived through, and how that influences their approach to research or planning as well.
Sorry.
Oh, Jacob, I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. So Ziana, this is another question for you. As I know, last semester you participated in the third Hubbub Showcase event, and the people chose you as their People's Choice project winner. So I'm wondering, what advice would you give to students to help them make the most of their experience working on future City Studio projects, and any advice for the Hubbub Project Showcase in particular?
Sorry, was that supposed to be directed at Valentina?
Oh, yes, I am sorry, Valentina, sorry.
I was going to say, if there was an award I didn't even know about.
I'm sorry, Valentina. The people chose you. The people chose you for the Hubbub Project Showcase People's Choice. Go ahead.
Yeah. So our project got picked as selected as the community choice, which was very humbling. And yes, our project was about removing barriers to employment for newcomers in London, which is a project that I'm very interested in and passionate about. So it was nice to see that and welcome in. Like kind of like building on what I've been, when discussing today, that I would recommend, and I'll give any advice to students, is that to embrace this learning experience as an opportunity to have their academic, the personal, and the professional interests come together to see themselves as agents of social change, as stakeholders as well, that can and will be seen and can collaborate and participate in changing and affecting our community in a positive way. And to really embrace this opportunity as, like, perhaps one of your first opportunities, chances to have your work presented in a way that can really impact the city where you live in. Also, to, like, at least for me, I feel very empowered by knowing this, working in my semester, knowing that the work I was putting together with my peers was perhaps going to be accepted as a recommendation, or at least considered to be included in some of, like, the city's plans to address this kind of issue. I feel very empowered by that, and perhaps if they if you maybe assume that role as well, like, the work I'm doing will mean something to this community, to this population, and I'm passionate about, I'm interested in working and bettering their experience in London, I think that will also just add a bit of extra layer of I don't know, to the work they're doing. And when you see your project being showcased and people coming to your booth and asking you questions, and they also have interest in that, and they also see the need, and they understand where you're coming from, I think that's also very reassuring, and I'm sure it will be really great for them to experience that too.
For sure. I feel the City Studio model, and especially the Hubbub events, can help strengthen the relationship between London residents and the students as well. And without the City Studio model, I feel the majority of projects are kept within the walls of educational institutions and don't really allow the chance for community to understand or engage with the learning that's taking place. So the Hubbub Project Showcase and the presence of City Studio London, and it's facilitating more conversation between the public and the students. And I think this is an opportunity that can benefit students and get them excited about participating, for sure. So what new perspectives or knowledge did any of you gain in regards to working with your peers, faculty, professors, city staff, and, like, in the City of London itself through your experience?
I think, well, perspectives, just by nature of reading all of the research that is done on different experiences that people have in London and how they can be improved, many new perspectives gained. In terms of knowledge, I'm not someone who's very tech savvy, especially not in the realm of social media at all. And our project was to do the social media advertising for the project on behalf of City Studio. So I had the opportunity to learn how many characters go in a Twitter post, and how the sizes for images on different types of social media need to be adjusted, and how you can use platforms like Hootsuite to schedule content. So a lot of practical knowledge also for me in working with Jacob and my team on this project, which I think is very useful. I'm heading into a marketing role, so having a better understanding of the way that the world works today was great for me. Yeah, that was a very, I would say, practical takeaway in terms of knowledge.
I was just thinking about this question, and it might sound a bit too academic because, I feel like without the commitment of my social work faculty to get involved with CityStudio, to reach out and to be like, hey, my students wants to work on this, and it is a lot of work, and professors take on that extra level of work. So I really appreciate Dr. Serti, which was my professor in this class, to do that, and also the director of the social program, Dr. Donahue, and everybody else in the faculty of social work to take on more work, because it is working with stakeholders, organizing schedules, guest speakers, class times. All of that is a lot of work, and you could have easily said, you know what, it's COVID, it's a lot of work, everybody's, we don't have time, but we have to make time for community work. We have to make time to think about our city, what it needs, how we can work together. So to me, I feel like none of this would have happened without that commitment. And again, with the knowledge, very much learned a lot about social work practice from a policy research perspective, the macro perspective. That might sound a little bit odd to you, but yeah, it's just like I see myself as a very political agent of social work change, and this definitely reassured that identity and built on that identity for me, that I can also, be a policymaker. I can work in research projects, work with other stakeholders, and maybe work with municipal governments in the long term. Who knows? There's lots of opportunities that you don't see yourself perhaps as a student, especially in your early years. But as you evolve in your career and your process, then you get these kind of opportunities to work with others and to see yourself as that. I think that's very valuable, and definitely learn a lot about what else is possible individually as in also as a community.
I think my biggest takeaways from engaging with CityStudio have been learnings about what the overlap with student councils look like. There's a lot of really great learning, of course, that comes from taking on a project and researching and sort of driving change from that academic standpoint. But there's also a lot of really important learning that students do, and a lot of community engaged learning that students do through student councils as a mechanism for working to make their communities better places. And so it's been a really interesting process to tease out where does the work that student councils are doing overlap with the work that CityStudio is doing, and how can these organizations be mutually supportive of one another. And maybe this is something we can talk a little bit about with the next question as well, but learning about the role student government organizations play in exposing students to community engaged learning opportunities, for example, has definitely been really interesting to learn more about and to pick apart more over the course of this last year.
Definitely. It's always interesting to learn about any uncertainties or challenges that students have to work with and adapt to in the midst of putting these conceptual projects together and working with CityStudio. So I'm curious to know of any thought-provoking questions or answers to questions that may have developed through your work, or challenges in the process of working on these projects that you had to adapt to.
I don't think we had any questions come up. We had many answers to questions that we had no idea were even interesting questions to ask. It was a huge process of learning. In terms of challenges, I think one thing was just learning how to coordinate a team, especially virtually. And something that we learned that really helps is when you have role clarity and assigning people to specific tasks. Sometimes it's great to get experience doing different things, but we did notice that it works best when we have someone who is dedicated to scheduling posts, someone who is dedicated to graphics. Organizing things that way means that you get expertise in what you're doing, you know when you're doing it, and you don't have to have that startup cost per se of organizing who needs to do what when, because the schedule changes every week. So that was a really practical little challenge and answer or solution that we found. Something else was that we didn't start off working with Jacob, we were working with Nikki Manfredi. And so there was a switch in, I guess, reporting structure halfway through the semester, but that was an incredible opportunity because we got to hop on a Zoom call, which functioned as sort of a halfway check-in for us to talk to Nikki and Jacob, and then Misha joined us as well. And even just having the opportunity to hear where everyone was coming from, what their experiences were. Misha shared a lot of her career journey, which as students is great to see. No one ever ends up taking a linear path. So I remember all of us leaving that meeting and having heard Nikki's and Jacob's and Misha's experiences and just being inspired as we head. I think all of us are in our last year. So it was really neat to see wherever you end up starting, that's just the first patchwork of the quilt. And then there's so many other patches that can be added on. So that was a small challenge. I wouldn't say it was particularly difficult. It ended up just being a wonderful opportunity to meet more people and get to work with the more amazing staff that City Studio really has. It's an incredible team.
For us in my class, because we had so much guidance and the mentorship of our professor and the City of London staff coming into work and checking with us every so many weeks, as part of our class, any challenges that might have come, they really were addressed and, looked up at the time. We didn't, because again, there's so much guidance and so much commitment from everybody to support us students. It didn't feel like there was a lot of challenges or like obstacles that weren't, targeted or like solved at the time. So for me, it felt like a very smooth process. Of course, coordinating, with your peers, with someone's in charge of different things, but that's more like a human resource aspect, like human capital, how you manage your time and expectations. But in terms of all the stakeholders working together, I think it really felt like everybody's invested in this succeeding. Like, how can we make this work and let's do it and let's address the issues when they arise. And so that felt good as well, because I know it could be challenging working with so many people and so many interests, but because again, City Studio works as that bridge of like, we're here to address this kind of, at least in my case, social innovation solutions, then it felt like we're all going the same way, and that if we needed something, we could just resolve it then and keep going. So I felt very supported during the process for sure.
I noted at the beginning of our conversation that I did sort of begin a City Studio project, but that in the wake of the onset of the pandemic, that project never actually ended up coming to fruition. But that in and of itself was a really cool learning experience to kind of understand how unexpected circumstances impact our capacity to take on different things. And what's been really cool about that was, while that project wasn't one that was finished, I know that the students in that class, because of the exposure to City Studios, have had, other opportunities to engage in, community engaged learning and other kinds of research projects. And people have gotten involved with City Studio in different ways, through projects with different classes, or, myself, I've gotten involved on the governance side of things. So it was a cool experience as far as being exposed to City Studio goes, and definitely was interesting in that the onset of COVID-19 was certainly challenging for that class's capacity to engage with the project, but yielded some other, really interesting opportunities as well.
Awesome. To speak to your point, Helen, yeah, being able to work with you guys for me was a very enriching part of my experience with City Studio. Yeah, it's been great, and sometimes changes in the middle of things, they just add to the experience. Challenge is great. And Ziana, this is a great segue into my next question. This is going to be our last question. We're coming up on our time here, but the end of the 2020 school year was rife with opportunities for change as we witnessed the beginning of the COVID pandemic and a broadening sincerity of the Black Lives Matter movement. In many ways, both of these events have forced our societies to reactively reflect on systemic racism and public health, among many other societal shortcomings. I'm curious to know your thoughts on how these events have evolved the governance of City Studio London over the past year, and in what ways, in your own views, has it encouraged the students and stakeholders involved in these projects to reflect on their relationships with each other and the community?
That's a fantastic question. And I think what I would start with is that in the wake of all these challenges and crises that we've seen over the course of the last year, I've seen City Studio place an emphasis on the importance of the student voice as far as decision-making goes. And in terms of the governance of City Studio, the student presidents of student councils at Huron and Brescia and Kings have had an opportunity to become involved which wasn't typical within the governance structure beforehand. And so it was really interesting to see how the conversations we were having about the importance of different perspectives and a variety of voices, and valuing the perspectives of stakeholders who aren't always given a seat at the table, that really sort of influenced, my understanding at least, is that it did influence decisions that were made as far as how, you know, the governance side of City Studio operates. So that's been really cool to see, because I think students definitely have a valuable and unique perspective, and have, you know, lived insights into how City Studio can function better for students. And so it's been really great to see that decision-making power being put into the hands of students.
For sure. I think having the City Studio model in place here in London has been a great asset to the city. There's been a lot of changes and adaptations that have needed to take place in a very short amount of time. And I know this past year, we've seen more projects with City Studio that are focused around public health and the COVID measures and different shortcomings that have occurred because of COVID, and especially as well as the Black Lives Matter movement. These projects are facilitating great conversation. A lot of students are becoming privy to knowledge and disparities in the community that they otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to beforehand. So I think these projects are really doing a great thing for the community and spreading the words of awareness and decreasing the inequalities that have arisen from these events. Helen or Valentina, did you guys have anything else that you would like to add to the governance of City Studio or the storytelling of these COVID-related Black Lives Matter projects that City Studio has brought forth this past year?
I think the only thing I would add, something that I've learned a bit about in one of my social impact classes at IVU, is the concept of gentrification and urbanization, and the role that actually plays in segregating different people groups, even when living in the exact same city, in the exact same proximity. And I've talked to people who have been around London, and there's areas that they've never been in. They go, I didn't even know that street existed, or that part of the city existed. And so it baffles me that we can be so close and yet still so segregated and isolated. And so I think the storytelling in terms of raising awareness plays an important role in bridging gaps. But then B, also the work that is actually being done in terms of city planning and city development. Yeah, I never really conceptualized how important infrastructure is in facilitating community and facilitating spaces where people feel comfortable gathering together and sharing in life and having common ground, even if everyone goes to their own homes in different places, in different east, north, south, wherever we are. Apartments, homes, and then also not just the kind of that space, but also the accessibility of it is something that is really important. And so storytelling helps people learn, but then also the development and the research and the ideation helps actually create those spaces where we can put into practice what we learn, and that infrastructure and those relationships also between City Studio, between students, between community partners, I think all works together in this ecosystem that we call London, and that is a home and a family to so many people. So that's been really a privilege to be a part of.
Just a couple last thoughts on that. I really appreciated being able to participate in my project, because it was a direct social work practice project. So for us, the idea of like social change, it's one of our principles as students, as professionals in the long term. And I think that, you know, City Studio and the City of London and, you know, institutions collaborating to address social issues is more important than ever. The issues have always been there, especially in London, a city that's so segregated, like Helen was saying. And, you know, there's lots of issues that go with that, from people monopolizing infrastructure and development to, you know, newcomers experiencing so many barriers to employment and assimilation and, you know, being together. So I feel like it's really important to have the focus of social change, not merely in like economic terms, right? We want to improve our city to make it more profitable, to get more jobs, but we can't forget the human aspect of things. And I think at least in my project, it felt like a very meaningful and real process to engage in, that hopefully our recommendations could be applied to at least impact the lives of newcomers to London, which are now like the second biggest population, despite after London-born people. So yeah, I feel like we're doing real things. It felt very much real to me. So it's just like a step in the right direction for sure.
Jacob, can I jump in with one last comment?
Of course, go ahead.
Wonderful. I was just going to echo what you mentioned earlier about the actual creation of these spaces to have discussions. And I remember earlier on in the year, City Studio presented an anti-racism project roundtable, which was a really, really cool sort of space to engage in and to hear about researchers from Western University and what their take was on what an anti-racism toolkit for the city could look like. It was definitely like a really fascinating project and such an interesting opportunity for audiences to learn more about what this actually entails. What does anti-racism mean? What does anti-discrimination mean? What are the interactions of these terms? And how does that function in a real world setting? So I think a lot of the power that City Studio has to expose audiences to these kinds of questions is really valuable and has been utilized really well to make this kind of information and these kind of discussions more accessible to the community as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's a great piece of conversation to add to this. So everyone, we're wrapping up our time here. I'd just like to mention that with each City Studio Hubbub project showcase comes the opportunity to learn many new things about our city. The intense concentration of material that is brought forth at these events by students after a semester of hard work is truly astounding. And it makes it a bit difficult to absorb it all in a sitting like the Hubbub showcase. So I encourage everyone who tuned into this roundtable to be sure to check out the projects tab of the CSL, the City Studio London website, if you'd like to spend some more time engaging with each of these projects. So Zayana, Helen, and Valentina, on behalf of City Studio London, I can't thank each of you enough for having this discussion and volunteering your time to share your experiences. Jamie, thank you for hanging out and being another friendly face on the screen.
Thank you to everyone. I was so happy to have the chance just to sit and listen. I learned so much. I'm new to the City Studio as of January, but I've been having a great time as the new projects coordinator, learning about how the City Studio process works. But having this chance to listen to you all, I gained a lot, and I'm really excited that you were participants. You're continuing on thinking about City Studio and what you are gaining from it, but you are extraordinary speakers. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. I know that I'm going to carry this forward to the next year of City Studio, and I'm excited for other people to take a look at Hubbub and all the projects that are here today. So thank you again.
Thank you also for making these opportunities available to us, Jacob. It's been awesome working with you, and thank you for your patience on times when we've skedaddled. It's been a great semester, so thank you to City Studio for making these opportunities available to us as students.
Thank you, Helen, and good luck with your new position. Valentina and Zayana, I wish you the best of luck with your future endeavors. This was a lot of fun, and I had a really great time chatting with all of you.
Thank you so much, Jacob, and really nice to meet you, Helen and Valentina.